The cantina on Kepler Station buzzed with the usual mix of traders, mercenaries, and drifters from across the galaxy. Smoke from a dozen different worlds curled through the air, creating a haze that softened the harsh lighting. In the darkest corner, away from prying eyes and recording devices, sat Commander Zektar of the Thrakari Empire, his 4 arms wrapped around a bottle of Rigelian whiskey that had seen better days. The grizzled veteran's exoskeleton bore the scars of countless battles, each mark telling a story of survival against impossible odds. His compound eyes, dulled by age and trauma, stared into the amber liquid as if searching for answers to questions he'd rather not ask. The cantina's patrons gave him a wide berth, recognizing the 1,000-yard stare of someone who had seen too much. A young Altarian journalist named Kess approached cautiously, her crystalline features reflecting the dim light. She had been hunting this story for months, tracking down veterans of the Galactic Wars who might be willing to speak about humanity's role in the conflict. Most refused to talk, their silence bought with nightmares and survivors' guilt. "Commander Zektar?" she asked softly, her voice carrying the melodic tones of her species. "I'm Kes Velandra from the Galactic Tribune. I was hoping we could discuss your experiences during the war." Zektar's head turned slowly, his multifaceted eyes focusing on her with difficulty. "War," he repeated, the word rolling off his mandibles like a curse. "Which one? We've had so many since the humans arrived." Kes settled into the chair across from him, her recording device discreetly activated. "The Third Galactic War, specifically your encounters with human forces. I understand you were present at several major engagements." A bitter laugh escaped the Thrakari's throat, a sound like grinding metal. "Encounters! Such a polite word for what those monsters did to us." He took a long pull from his bottle, then fixed her with a stare that made her shimmering skin crawl. "You want to know about humans, little crystal? You sure you can handle the truth?" The cantina seemed to grow quieter around them, as if the very mention of humanity had cast a pall over the establishment. Kes nodded, though she felt a chill run through her crystalline matrix. "I was a young officer then," Zektar began, his voice taking on the cadence of someone recounting a recurring nightmare. "Fresh out of the Imperial War College, full of pride and certainty about our place in the galaxy. We Thrakari had ruled the Outer Rim for 3 centuries, our fleets, the terror of lesser species. We were apex predators, evolved from the most vicious hunters our homeworld had ever produced." He paused, mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "The first reports of humans came from our scouts in what you call the Sol system. Primitive bipeds, they said. No natural weapons, no armor plating, no apparent genetic advantages. They had barely learned to leave their homeworld. Our strategists laughed. Our generals saw an opportunity for easy slaves." Kes leaned forward, her recorder catching every word. Around them, other patrons had unconsciously edged closer, drawn by the rare opportunity to hear a first-hand account from someone who had faced humans in combat. "The first engagement was at Proxima Base," Zektar continued, his 4 hands absently tracing old scars on his carapace. "A minor human colony, maybe 50,000 settlers. We sent a single battle group, 3 heavy cruisers and a complement of fighters, standard intimidation tactics, show up, demand surrender, take what we wanted." The veteran's eyes grew distant, lost in memory. "They didn't surrender. This tiny outpost, with nothing but converted mining ships and jury-rigged weapons, opened fire on our fleet. Our captain was amused. He ordered a demonstration, destroying their largest vessel to show them the futility of resistance." Zektar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation among his species. "That's when we learned our first lesson about humans. They don't know when to quit. Instead of surrendering, they became more desperate, more unpredictable. One of their mining ships, Little more than an engine strapped to an asteroid harvester rammed our flagship. The Altarian journalist felt her crystalline structure vibrate with shock. Ramming attacks were considered suicidal desperation, the last resort of the truly defeated. They destroyed their own ship? Ship, crew, everything, Zektar confirmed grimly. Punched right through our forward shields and took out our main gun. But that wasn't the worst part. As they died, they transmitted something to the other human colonies. Not coordinates or tactical data, but something far more dangerous. He took another drink, his hands trembling slightly. They transmitted their defiance. Words spread through human space like a virus. Every colony, every outpost, every mining station suddenly became a fortress. They turned cargo haulers into warships, civilian shields into armor plating, mining lasers into weapons of war. The cantina had grown completely silent now, every patron hanging on the veteran's words. Even the bartender, a massive gorillion with arms like tree trunks, had stopped his endless glass polishing to listen. Within 6 months, our easy conquest had become a grinding war of attrition, Zektar continued. Every system we took cost us ships, crews, resources. The humans learned from every defeat, adapted to every strategy. They studied our weapons, our tactics, our psychology. And they began to change. Kess's recorder was picking up elevated stress patterns in the commander's voice, biological indicators that suggested he was reliving traumatic experiences. Changed how? Evolution, Zektar whispered, as if the word itself was dangerous. Not biological, but tactical, technological. They reverse-engineered our weapons, improved them, made them deadlier. Within a year, their ships were using Thrakari plasma cannons, but somehow they made them fire faster, burn hotter, penetrate deeper. The veteran's 4 arms gestured wildly as he spoke, his agitation growing. But that was just the beginning. They started using psychological warfare, broadcasting recordings of our defeats across the galaxy. Other species began to take notice. The Cetacean Alliance, the Rodan Republic, even the neutral trade guilds started questioning our supremacy. He leaned forward conspiratorially, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Do you know what the most terrifying thing about humans is? Journalist? It's not their aggression or their technology or their refusal to surrender. It's their imagination. The word hung in the air like a physical presence. Imagination, among most galactic species, was considered a minor cognitive trait, useful for art and entertainment, but irrelevant to serious pursuits like warfare or science. They think of things that shouldn't be possible, Zektar explained. Strategies so unconventional, so outside the normal parameters of conflict, that our computers couldn't predict them. They turned their own weaknesses into advantages. He pointed one clawed finger at his own exoskeleton. We Thrakari evolved natural armor, so we never developed energy shields. Humans, soft and vulnerable, became masters of defensive technology. Their ships could take punishment that would vaporize our hulls. The veteran paused to order another bottle, his first already empty. When the bartender brought it over, Zektar noticed the gorillion's fearful expression and laughed bitterly. Even you're afraid of them, aren't you, barkeep? And you've never even seen one. The massive alien nodded reluctantly, his massive hands fidgeting with his towel. Smart. Very smart. Zektar turned back to Kess, his compound eyes reflecting the cantina's lights like broken mirrors. The Battle of Rigel 7 was where everything changed. We had cornered a human fleet, outnumbered them 3-1. Should have been a slaughter. Our admiral was so confident he brought recording equipment to document our glorious victory. The veteran's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter or sobbing. The humans had been studying us for 2 years by then. They knew our ships, our weapons, our formation preferences, but more than that, they knew us. He tapped his temple with one finger. They understood that Thrakari commanders value personal glory above tactical effectiveness. They knew our rigid command structure made us predictable, so they did something that defied every principle of civilized warfare. Kes found herself holding her breath, her crystalline structure resonating with anticipation. They used our own psychology against us, Zektar continued. Their admiral, a human female named Chen, broadcast a direct challenge to our fleet commander. Not to his fleet, to him personally. She questioned his courage, his competence, his worthiness to command. The veteran shook his head slowly. Any rational commander would have ignored such obvious bait. But humans understood that Thrakari psychology doesn't allow for perceived slights to go unanswered. Our admiral abandoned his formation, charged directly at the human flagship with half our fleet following him. Into a trap, Kes breathed. Into a masterpiece of tactical deception, Zektar corrected. The human ships weren't where they appeared to be. Sensor ghosts, holographic projections, electronic warfare so sophisticated our instruments couldn't detect the deception. When our admiral realized the truth, it was too late. Human vessels materialized from empty space, surrounding our scattered forces. The cantina erupted in nervous chatter as the implications sank in. Holographic deception on that scale required technology decades ahead of anything most species possessed. But even that wasn't the worst part, Zektar continued, seemingly oblivious to the commotion around him. The worst part was what happened after we surrendered. He took a long drink, his hands shaking noticeably now. We expected torture, experimentation, slow death. That's what we would have done to captured humans. Instead, they healed our wounded, fed us, treated our injuries. And then they did something that still gives me nightmares. The veteran's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing everyone in the cantina to strain to hear him. They showed us mercy. Not because they were weak, but because they could afford to. They were so confident in their superiority that they could spare the lives of their enemies. Kes felt her internal temperature drop several degrees. Among most galactic species, mercy was indeed seen as weakness, a luxury only the victorious could afford to display. And while they were showing us this mercy, Zektar continued, they were studying us, learning our language, our culture, our fears. Every Thrakari prisoner became an intelligence asset, whether they cooperated or not. Humans have this ability to read micro-expressions, body language, vocal patterns. They can tell when you're lying just by watching your face. The veteran gestured around the cantina. Look at all of you. Different species, different evolutionary paths, different biologies. But humans can read every single one of you like an open book. They understand fear, anger, deception, hope, better than we understand ourselves. A Silurian trader at a nearby table spoke up, his serpentine form coiled nervously around his chair. Surely you're exaggerating. No species could be that adaptable. Zektar fixed him with a stare that made the trader's scales ripple with fear. Am I? Tell me, Scaleskin. What do you know about the Battle of Vegan Prime? The Silurian's head swayed nervously. I heard rumors. The entire hegemony fleet destroyed in 6 hours? 6 hours, Zektar confirmed. The hegemony had ruled the core worlds for a millennium. Their technology was legendary, their tactics proven across countless campaigns. They brought 800 ships to Vegan Prime, expecting to crush a human colony world with a population of 12 million. The veteran's 4 arms spread wide, encompassing the entire cantina. The humans had exactly 27 ships, converted civilian vessels mostly, freighters with bolted-on weapons, passenger liners turned into carriers, even a luxury yacht armed with mining charges. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. The idea of luxury yachts engaging military dreadnoughts was absurd on its face. The hegemony admiral broadcast his terms of surrender, Zektar continued. Standard procedure, you understand. Overwhelming force, immediate capitulation, minimal damage to valuable infrastructure. The humans responded by broadcasting their own message to the hegemony fleet. He paused dramatically, savoring the moment. They thanked the admiral for bringing them so many ships. The cantina fell silent. Even the background music seemed to fade away. In those 6 hours, the humans captured or destroyed the entire hegemony fleet. Not defeated, captured. They used computer viruses to take control of hegemony navigation systems, turning their own ships against each other. They deployed something they called smart minds that could think, adapt, hunt. Zektar's voice grew hoarse with remembered terror. But the most terrifying moment came when the hegemony flagship tried to retreat. A human vessel, nothing more than a converted cargo hauler, transmitted a simple message: "Please stand by for boarding." The veteran laughed bitterly. Boarding. A cargo ship demanding the surrender of a kilometer-long dreadnought with enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. The hegemony crew thought it was some kind of joke until human marines began materializing on their bridge. Materializing. Kess's voice cracked slightly. Teleportation technology, Zektar explained. Not transportation, instant matter transfer. They could put armed soldiers anywhere they wanted, bypassing shields, armor, defenses. One moment you're secure in your command center, the next there's a human pointing a weapon at your head, politely asking you to surrender. A Rhodian engineer at a corner table spoke up, his voice trembling. That's impossible. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical. Impossible for us, Zektar agreed. But humans don't seem to understand the meaning of the word impossible. They looked at the fundamental laws of physics and decided they were more like suggestions. The veteran took another drink, his hands steady now, as if the alcohol or the telling of his story had calmed his nerves. The aftermath of Vegan Prime changed everything. Overnight, humanity went from upstart colonists to the most feared military force in the galaxy. Species that had ignored the conflict suddenly began choosing sides. He gestured to the mixed crowd around them. Most chose to join humanity rather than face them as enemies. The smart ones, anyway. The stubborn ones learned the hard way that human patience, like human mercy, has limits. Kess realized she had been recording for over an hour. But the veteran showed no signs of fatigue or reluctance to continue. If anything, he seemed energized by the opportunity to share his experiences. The war lasted another 3 years after Vegan Prime, Zektar continued. But it wasn't really a war anymore. It was a teaching exercise, humans demonstrating to the galaxy that the old order was dead, and they were its replacement. What made them so effective? Kess asked, genuinely curious now rather than just professionally interested. What gave them such an advantage? Zektar considered the question carefully, his compound eyes reflecting the cantina's lights. Adaptability. Every other species in the galaxy evolved for specific environments, specific challenges. Thrakari are perfect predators for desert worlds. Hegemony are ideal for high-gravity ocean planets. Altarians thrive in crystalline caves with specific mineral compositions. He pointed one clawed finger at her. But humans? They evolved on a death world where everything tried to kill them. Not just predators, but weather, disease, natural disasters, even their own food. They learned to survive by being able to change, to overcome, to never accept defeat as final. The veteran's voice took on an almost reverent tone. They didn't just adapt to their environment, they changed their environment to suit them. Terraforming technology, atmospheric processors, gravity generators, they can make any world into a human world. A young cetacean at the bar turned to face them, her gill slits fluttering with anxiety. But surely they must have some weakness, some limitation? Zektar's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Oh, they have weaknesses. Individually, they're fragile, short-lived, prone to emotional decision-making. But those weaknesses become strengths when you multiply them by billions. He leaned forward, his voice taking on the cadence of a lecturer. A single human might make an emotional decision, but a billion humans making emotional decisions creates a statistical probability that someone will make the right choice. Their short lifespans mean rapid generational change, constant adaptation, innovation at a pace that long-lived species can't match. The veteran paused to order food, his appetite apparently returning as he spoke. And their fragility? That taught them to work together, to build tools, to create technologies that compensate for their physical limitations. Every human weakness became a driver for technological advancement. As his meal arrived, Zektar continued speaking between bites. By the war's end, human technology had advanced 50 years in the space of a decade. Weapons that could crack planets, shields that could deflect stellar radiation, computers that could predict the outcome of battles before they began. He fixed Kess with a stare that made her crystalline structure resonate uncomfortably. But technology wasn't their greatest weapon. Their greatest weapon was hope. Hope. The word seemed inadequate for the fear she could see in the veteran's eyes. Hope that tomorrow could be better than today, Zektar explained. Hope that problems could be solved, that challenges could be overcome, that defeat was always temporary. Most species accept their limitations. Work within them. Humans see limitations as problems to be solved. The cantina had grown completely quiet now, every patron absorbed in the veteran's tale. Even the background music had been turned off, leaving only the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional clink of glasses. The final battle took place at Terra itself, Zektar continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The last alliance of non-human species, everything we could scrape together. Over 2,000 ships from across the galaxy united in one final attempt to destroy humanity before they could complete their conquest. He shook his head slowly. We were so proud, so confident. Surely, we thought, quantity would triumph over quality. Surely 2,000 ships could defeat whatever force humanity could muster to defend their homeworld. The veteran's 4 hands clenched into fists. We arrived at the Sol system expecting to find a heavily defended fortress world, bristling with weapons and surrounded by defensive stations. Instead, we found Earth apparently undefended, with only a handful of human ships in orbit. Nervous laughter rippled through the cantina. The idea of leaving one's homeworld undefended during wartime seemed beyond foolish. Our Alliance commander ordered an immediate attack, Zektar continued. 2,000 ships diving toward a single world, ready to end the human threat once and for all. The few human vessels in orbit didn't even attempt to engage us. He paused, taking a long drink. That should have been our first warning. Humans never retreat without a reason. But we were too excited by the prospect of easy victory to consider the implications. What happened? Kess asked, though she dreaded the answer. We learned that Earth wasn't undefended, Zektar replied grimly. It was a trap. The humans had turned their entire planet into a weapon. The statement hung in the air like a physical presence. Turning a planet into a weapon was theoretically possible, but the technological and energy requirements were beyond anything most species had even imagined. Gravity generators in the planet's core began creating tidal forces that pulled our ships toward the surface, Zektar explained. Atmospheric ionization turned the entire upper atmosphere into a massive electromagnetic pulse generator. Weather control systems created storms that could tear apart starship hulls. His voice grew hoarse with remembered terror. And then the planetary defense grid came online. Not weapons satellites or orbital platforms, but the planet itself. Mountains opening up to reveal massive energy cannons, oceans boiling away to expose underwater missile launchers. Even the ice caps were weaponized, launching frozen projectiles at relativistic speeds. The veteran's 4 arms shook as he reached for his drink. In 20 minutes, we lost 90% of our fleet. Not destroyed, captured, disabled by weapons we couldn't even see, boarded by Marines who seemed to appear from nowhere, our crews taken prisoner by enemies who showed them more mercy than we deserved. Kes felt her crystalline structure vibrating with shock. The scale of the defeat he described was beyond anything in recorded galactic history. The surviving ships? She managed to ask. Escaped, Zektar confirmed. The humans let us go. Let us return to our homeworlds and tell everyone what we had seen. That was their true weapon, you understand. Not the technology, or the tactics, or the planetary defenses. He fixed her with a stare that seemed to look right through her. Fear. They turned us into carriers of fear, spreading terror across the galaxy more effectively than any propaganda campaign. Every survivor became a witness to human power, a living testament to the futility of resistance. The cantina remained silent for several minutes, the weight of the veteran's words settling over the patrons like a shroud. Finally, the Rhodian engineer spoke up again. What happened after the war, when humanity had won? Zektar's mandibles clicked slowly. That might be the most terrifying part of all. They did exactly what they said they would do. They kept their promises. I don't understand, Kes admitted. During the war, human negotiators made certain guarantees, the veteran explained. Surrender peacefully, and your species would be treated with respect. Cooperate with the transition, and you would retain autonomy over your homeworlds. Help build a new galactic order, and you would share in its benefits. He gestured around the cantina. Look around you. We're all here, aren't we? Free to travel, trade, speak our minds. The humans could have enslaved us, exterminated us, strip-mined our worlds for resources. Instead, they kept their word. The veteran's voice took on a note of grudging respect. They established the Terran Federation, but made it truly federal. Human representatives, yes, but also Thrakari senators, Altarian judges, Cetacean admirals. They didn't just conquer us, they invited us to help them govern. Kes found this revelation almost harder to believe than the tales of planetary weapons and teleporting Marines. Conquerors, in her experience, rarely shared power with the conquered. But surely they maintained ultimate control, she pressed. Oh, absolutely, Zektar confirmed. Make no mistake, this is a human galaxy now. They have the final say in all major decisions. But they're subtle about it. They rule through consensus when possible, force only when necessary. The veteran paused, considering his words carefully. The truly terrifying thing is that they're good at it. Crime is down across all member worlds. Trade has increased tenfold. Technological advancement continues at an unprecedented pace. They've made the galaxy better. That disturbs you, Kes observed. Of course it does, Zektar replied. I'm old enough to remember when we Thrakari were apex predators, when strength and cunning were the only laws that mattered. The humans have introduced concepts like justice, equality, compassion. They've made virtues out of what we once considered weaknesses. He took another drink, his 4 hands steady now. My own grandchildren speak standard Terran better than they speak Thrakari. They attend human schools, study human philosophy, dream of joining Starfleet or the Exploration Corps. They see humans not as conquerors, but as role models. The veteran's compound eyes reflected a mixture of sadness and acceptance. Perhaps that's their greatest victory of all. They didn't just defeat us militarily, they convinced our children that defeat was actually liberation. The cantina remained quiet for several more minutes, the patrons digesting not just the veteran's words but their implications. Finally, Kes worked up the courage to ask the question that had been haunting her throughout the interview. Commander Zektar, after everything you've told me, everything you've experienced, how do you feel about humans now? The veteran was quiet for so long that Kes began to wonder if he had heard her question. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I fear them, he admitted. Not because they're cruel or evil or destructive, I fear them because they're everything we thought we were, but better. They're the apex predators we pretended to be, the master strategists we claimed to be, the advanced civilization we believed ourselves to be. He looked around the cantina one final time, his gaze taking in the mixed species gathered there. But more than that, I respect them. They could have ground us under their heel, but instead they lifted us up. They could have ruled through fear, but instead they choose to lead by example. Zektar stood up slowly, his forearms working to balance his weight after hours of drinking and talking. Do you want to know the real secret of human success, journalist? They don't just adapt to change, they embrace it. They see every setback as a learning opportunity, every enemy as a potential friend, every problem as a puzzle to be solved. He moved toward the cantina's exit, then paused and looked back. We spent centuries believing that survival was about being the strongest, the fastest, the most ruthless. The humans taught us that survival is about being the most adaptable, the most cooperative, the most determined. As the veteran disappeared into the station's corridors, Kes sat alone with her recorder, processing everything she had heard. Around her, the cantina slowly returned to its normal buzz of conversation, but she could see that every patron had been affected by Zektar's testimony. The Rhodian engineer was staring at his drink with a troubled expression. The cetacean at the bar was speaking quietly with the Silurian trader, their voices hushed and respectful. Even the massive Gorillian bartender seemed subdued as he went about his duties. Kes realized that she had gotten far more than just a story. She had received a glimpse into the fundamental transformation that humanity had brought to the galaxy, a change so profound that even those who had fought against it couldn't deny its benefits. As she prepared to leave, Kes noticed that the cantina's usual mix of species seemed somehow different now. Where before she had seen aliens, foreigners, others, she now saw fellow citizens of a galaxy that humanity had not just conquered, but united. The veteran's tale had revealed a truth that most of the galaxy was still coming to terms with. Humanity hadn't just won a war, they had redefined what it meant to be civilized. And perhaps most terrifying of all, they had made it look easy. 3 days after her encounter with Commander Zektar, Kes found herself aboard a transport heading to Arcturus Station, the heart of the Terran Federation's administrative sector. The veteran's words haunted her thoughts, but she needed more perspectives, more voices to tell the complete story of humanity's impact on galactic civilization. Arcturus Station was a marvel of engineering that perfectly embodied the human approach to problem solving. Rather than building separate sections for different species with their varying environmental needs, human engineers had created adaptive zones that could shift atmospheric composition, gravity, and lighting in real time. A methane-breathing Jovian could walk seamlessly from their preferred environment into an Earth-normal section without the need for environmental suits or transitional chambers. The station buzzed with activity as representatives from hundreds of worlds conducted the business of governing a galaxy. Kes marveled at the casual interaction between species that had been mortal enemies just decades ago. Thrakari trade officials debated shipping routes with hegemony economists, while cetacean diplomats mediated disputes between mining consortiums. Her destination was the Veterans Affairs Office, where she had arranged to meet with Dr. Salan Vorthak, a hegemony neuroscientist who had served as a battlefield medic during the war. Unlike Zektar, who had fought humans from the beginning, Vorthak had witnessed their rise from the perspective of someone trying to heal the wounded they left behind. The doctor's office was a study in contrasts, filled with medical equipment from a dozen different worlds alongside personal mementos from her military service. Vorthak herself was an imposing figure even by hegemony standards, her massive frame enhanced by cybernetic implants that allowed her to interface directly with medical equipment. "Kes Velandra," Vorthak rumbled, her voice carrying the deep harmonics characteristic of her species. "I've read your preliminary reports on veteran experiences. Interesting work, though I suspect you're not prepared for what you're going to hear. The doctor gestured for Kess to sit, while she retrieved a steaming cup of something that smelled like burnt metal and ozone. Thrakari caffeine supplement, she explained, noticing Kess's expression. I acquired a taste for it during the war, one of many adaptations I made. Dr. Vorthak, your records indicate you served in frontline medical units throughout the conflict, Kess began, her recording device active. You would have seen the aftermath of human combat operations firsthand. Aftermath, Vorthak repeated thoughtfully. Such a clinical term for the revolutionary changes humans brought to warfare. Yes, I saw the aftermath. I also saw the during and the before. Each stage taught me something different about what humanity truly represents. The doctor moved to a wall display showing medical scan readouts, her cybernetic implants interfacing with the system to call up specific files. Let me start with the before. When we first encountered human prisoners of war, the display showed anatomical scans of human physiology, cross-referenced with data from other known species. We hegemony have always prided ourselves on our medical knowledge. Our biology textbooks catalog over 10,000 sentient species, their physiologies, their weaknesses, their medical needs. Vorthak pointed to specific readings on the scans. Humans, at first glance, seemed utterly unremarkable. No natural armor, no redundant organ systems, no enhanced healing capabilities. Their bone density was average, their muscle fibers standard, their neural processing speed within normal parameters. But, Kess prompted, sensing there was more to the story. But when we began treating wounded human prisoners, we discovered that our textbooks were worthless, Vorthak continued. Human physiology is deceptively complex. Their bodies are not optimized for any single environment or challenge, but instead represent a compromise that allows them to function in almost any conditions. The display shifted to show comparative healing rates across species. A Thrakari warrior with a severed limb will die without immediate medical intervention. Our exoskeletons are strong but brittle, and our internal organs are specialized for specific functions. Damage one system, and the entire organism fails. She manipulated the display to highlight human recovery statistics. A human with similar injuries will not only survive, but actively fight to heal themselves. Their immune systems adapt to foreign pathogens in real time. Their bones rebuild stronger after being broken. Their neural pathways reroute around damaged areas, restoring function through sheer determination. Kess studied the data with growing amazement. They're naturally resistant to trauma? More than resistant, Vorthak corrected. They're enhanced by it. Every injury, every disease, every stressor makes them more adaptable to future challenges. We found human prisoners who had survived wounds that should have been instantly fatal, not through medical intervention, but through their body's refusal to accept death as an outcome. The doctor's expression grew thoughtful. But physical resilience was just the beginning. What truly set humans apart was their psychological response to trauma. The display changed to show brain scan comparisons between different species under stress conditions. Most sentient beings, when faced with overwhelming odds or traumatic experiences, exhibit predictable psychological responses: withdrawal, acceptance, despair, madness. These are normal, healthy reactions to impossible situations. Kess found herself leaning forward, fascinated despite the grim subject matter. Humans, Vorthak continued, respond to trauma by becoming more determined to overcome it. Where other species break under pressure, humans forge themselves into stronger tools. We documented cases of human prisoners who had been tortured, starved, and psychologically brutalized, yet emerged from captivity more committed to their cause than when they entered. The neuroscientist's massive hands gestured to her own cybernetic implants. These modifications allow me to interface directly with medical equipment, to process diagnostic data at superhuman speeds. I installed them after studying human prisoners of war, trying to understand how their brains processed information so efficiently under stress. You modified yourself to be more like them? I modified myself to be more effective at treating them, Vorthak clarified. As the war progressed, we began receiving human casualties who had been injured by their own side's experimental weapons. Energy disruptors that should have caused permanent neural damage, biological agents that should have dissolved organic tissue, gravitational weapons that should have liquefied their skeletal structures. The doctor's voice took on a note of professional admiration. Not only were these humans surviving exposures that would kill any other species, they were providing detailed reports on the weapons' effects to help their engineers improve them. Kes felt her crystalline structure vibrate with shock. They were experimenting on themselves. Not experimenting, Vorthak corrected. Testing. Every human casualty became a source of data for improving their equipment and tactics. They turned being wounded into a form of intelligence gathering. The display shifted to show medical records from a field hospital. This is where I first realized that humans didn't just fight differently, they thought differently. When treating wounded soldiers from other species, our focus was always on returning them to their previous baseline condition. For humans, the baseline was constantly changing. She highlighted specific cases on the screen. Human soldiers would return from medical treatment with enhanced capabilities. Cybernetic limbs that were stronger than biological ones, sensory implants that provided superhuman awareness, neural interfaces that allowed direct communication with their equipment. They were upgrading themselves, Kes breathed. Constantly, Vorthak confirmed. Every injury became an opportunity for improvement. Lost an eye? Install a multispectrum sensor array. Damaged lungs? Replace them with atmospheric processors that could function in any environment. Traumatic brain injury? Neural implants that provided perfect memory and enhanced calculation abilities. The doctor paused to take a drink of her caffeine supplement, her expression thoughtful. But the truly remarkable thing wasn't the technology itself. It was their attitude toward it. Other species view cybernetic enhancement as a necessary evil, a last resort for the critically injured. Humans saw it as an upgrade, an improvement over their baseline biology. Kes was beginning to understand why Zektar had seemed so shaken by his experiences. They were evolving in real time. Faster than evolution, Vorthak agreed. Biological evolution takes millennia. Human technological enhancement could be implemented in hours. By the war's end, we were treating human soldiers who had been modified so extensively that they barely qualified as the same species we had first encountered. The display changed to show tactical analysis reports. This was where the during phase of my education began. As human capabilities expanded, so did their strategic options. They began deploying soldiers who could survive in hard vacuum, fight in crushing gravity fields, operate in corrosive atmospheric conditions that would dissolve our equipment. Kes studied the reports with growing unease. They were adapting to any environment they encountered. More than adapting, Vorthak emphasized. They were claiming it. Human marines could establish beachheads on worlds that no other species could even visit, much less conquer. They turned environmental hazards into tactical advantages. The neuroscientist called up a specific case study. The Battle of Sulphur Springs, a hegemony stronghold built on a world with an atmosphere composed primarily of sulfuric acid vapor. We considered it impregnable because no other species possessed environmental suits capable of functioning in such conditions. Let me guess, Kes said grimly. The humans found a way. They didn't find a way, Vorthak corrected. They made a way. Human engineers analyzed the atmospheric composition and designed soldiers specifically for that environment. Acid-resistant skin grafts, respiratory systems that could process sulfur compounds, sensory adaptations that allowed them to see through the chemical haze. The doctor's cybernetic implants flickered as she accessed deeper files. The attack lasted 18 minutes. Our defenders never saw them coming through the acid fog. When it was over, the humans offered to evacuate our personnel to safety, treating our chemical burns with medical techniques we didn't even know existed. They showed mercy again, Kess observed. They showed superiority, Vorthak replied. Mercy implies equality, a choice between helping and harming. What humans demonstrated was such overwhelming capability that harming us would have been pointless. Why destroy a facility when you can capture it? Why kill defenders when you can recruit them? The display shifted to show post-battle statistics. 70% of the hegemony garrison at Sulphur Springs requested transfer to human forces after their rescue, not because they were coerced, but because they wanted to join the winning side. Kess found this statistic harder to believe than tales of planetary weapons. They voluntarily switched sides? Humans have this remarkable ability to make their enemies want to become their allies, Vorthak explained. They don't just defeat you militarily, they convince you that defeat is actually victory. They offer opportunities for advancement, for improvement, for becoming something better than you were. The neuroscientist gestured to her own enhanced form. I'm a perfect example. I was a hegemony military medic, dedicated to treating our wounded and returning them to battle against human forces. Now I'm a Federation researcher, using human-derived technology to advance medical science for the benefit of all species. How did that transition happen? Vorthak was quiet for a moment, her massive frame settling back into her chair. It started with a single human patient, a Marine who had been critically wounded in a raid on one of our medical research facilities. His squad had extracted him under fire, but his injuries were beyond our ability to treat. The doctor's expression grew distant as she recalled the memory. Standard protocol would have been to let him die. Resources were limited. And treating enemy wounded was not a priority. But something about his condition intrigued me from a research perspective. What kind of injuries? Cellular disruption from an experimental hegemony weapon, Vorthak explained. His body was literally dissolving at the molecular level, his DNA unwinding like poorly coded software. By all rights, he should have been dead before his squad even extracted him. The display showed medical scan sequences, tracking the progression of the human's condition. But his immune system was fighting the weapon's effects, actually adapting to counter the cellular disruption. I had never seen anything like it. Did you save him? I tried to study him, Vorthak admitted. Professional curiosity overrode military protocol. I wanted to understand how his body was resisting our most advanced biological weapon. The doctor's cybernetic implants flickered with emotion. That's when I learned about human gratitude. Despite being my prisoner, despite knowing I was studying him like a laboratory specimen, he began helping with my research. Kess felt her crystalline structure vibrate with surprise. Helping how? He explained how his body felt as it fought the weapon's effects, described sensations that our instruments couldn't detect, biological processes that our scans couldn't measure. He turned himself into a collaborative research subject. The display showed increasingly detailed biological data. With his help, I not only developed a treatment for the weapon's effects, but improved it beyond anything our original designers had imagined. The human's insights allowed me to understand cellular regeneration in ways that revolutionized my approach to medicine. Vorthak's expression grew thoughtful. When human forces liberated the facility 3 weeks later, they found me working alongside my former prisoner to perfect the treatment. Not because I had switched sides, but because the research had become more important than the war. And they recruited you? They offered me a choice, the doctor clarified. Continue my research under Federation auspices, with access to resources and data from across the galaxy, or return to hegemony space and resume military medicine with outdated techniques and limited supplies. She gestured around her enhanced office. The choice was obvious. Under human guidance, my research has advanced decades beyond what would have been possible under the hegemony. I've developed treatments for conditions that were previously incurable, enhanced healing techniques that work across multiple species, diagnostic tools that can predict medical problems before they manifest. Kess was beginning to see a pattern in these testimonies. They don't just defeat their enemies, they upgrade them. Exactly, Vorthak confirmed. Humans understand that victory isn't just about winning conflicts, it's about improving everything the conflict touches. They don't see war as destruction. They see it as a catalyst for advancement. The neuroscientist called up another set of files. Which brings me to the aftermath phase of my education. After the war ended, I was assigned to study the long-term effects of human enhancement technology on other species. The display showed medical records spanning several years. What we discovered was that humans hadn't just changed themselves during the war, they had changed everyone they came into contact with. Former enemies who joined Federation forces showed improved physical capabilities, enhanced cognitive function, better resistance to disease and injury. Improved how? Exposure to human training methods, medical techniques, and enhancement technologies had a synergistic effect on other species, Vorthak explained. Thrakari, who underwent human combat conditioning, showed increased exoskeleton density and improved reflexes. Cetaceans who worked with human naval forces developed enhanced echolocation and improved underwater endurance. The doctor highlighted specific cases, but the most dramatic changes were psychological. Species that had been locked into rigid behavioral patterns for millennia began showing unprecedented adaptability and creativity. Kes found herself struggling to process the implications. They're changing the fundamental nature of other species? They're revealing the potential that was always there, Vorthak corrected. Humans don't change other species so much as they inspire them to change themselves. They demonstrate that adaptation is possible, that improvement is achievable, that limitations can be overcome. The display shifted to show before and after comparisons of various species. Look at these psychological profiles. Pre-war hegemony citizens showed high degrees of conformity, risk aversion, and acceptance of hierarchical authority. Post-war Federation citizens of hegemony origin show increased creativity, initiative, and collaborative problem-solving abilities. You're describing a fundamental transformation of galactic civilization. Exactly, Vorthak agreed. Humans didn't conquer the galaxy through superior firepower or advanced technology, though they had both. They conquered it by proving that every species could become better than they thought possible. The neuroscientist moved to a window overlooking the station's central plaza, where representatives from dozens of worlds were gathered in animated discussion. Look at them. A few decades ago, those species would have been at each other's throats over territorial disputes or resource allocation. Now they're collaborating on projects that benefit everyone. Kes joined her at the window, observing the casual interaction between former enemies. What changed? Humans introduced the concept of positive-sum thinking, Vorthak explained. Most species view resources, territory, and opportunities as finite quantities to be fought over. Humans demonstrated that cooperation could expand the total available resources, making everyone wealthier and more secure. The doctor pointed to specific groups in the plaza. That's a joint research team working on terraforming technology, Thrakari geological expertise, cetacean atmospheric processing, human engineering coordination. Together, they can make dead worlds livable in a fraction of the time any single species could manage. And everyone benefits from the results? Everyone benefits exponentially, Vorthak confirmed. Each world terraformed becomes a resource base for future projects. Each species that contributes gains access to techniques and technologies they could never develop alone. Humans created a system where helping others automatically helps yourself. The neuroscientist's cybernetic implants flickered as she accessed communication networks. Would you like to see something really remarkable? I can show you real-time data on technological advancement across Federation space. The wall display lit up with a complex visualization showing innovation rates, patent applications, scientific discoveries, and technological implementations across hundreds of worlds. The data flowed like a living organism, with bright pulses representing breakthrough moments and steady streams showing ongoing development. Before the war, technological advancement followed predictable patterns, Vorthak explained. Each species developed within their specialty areas at steady, incremental rates. The total galactic advancement curve showed gradual improvement over centuries. She manipulated the display to highlight the war years and their aftermath. Human involvement didn't just add their advancement to the total, it multiplied everyone else's development speed. Innovation rates increased by orders of magnitude across all participating species. Kess watched the data streams with fascination. How is that possible? Humans brought something the galaxy had never seen before: systematic knowledge sharing, Vorthak replied. Instead of hoarding technological advances for competitive advantage, they published everything openly and encouraged others to build upon their work. The display zoomed in on specific research networks. See these connection patterns? That's real-time collaboration between research teams on different worlds, different species, working on related problems. A breakthrough on one world immediately becomes available to researchers everywhere. That seems inefficient from a military standpoint. That's exactly what we thought, Vorthak agreed. We assumed humans were weakening themselves by sharing their advantages. What we failed to understand is that shared knowledge grows exponentially when combined with other knowledge. The doctor highlighted a specific research project. This is a perfect example. Human warp drive technology, combined with Thrakari metallurgy and cetacean navigation techniques, has produced a propulsion system that's 3 times faster than anything any single species could have developed. And all 3 species benefit from the result? All 3 species, plus every other Federation member who wants to implement the technology, Vorthak confirmed. Humans created a system where individual advancement automatically becomes collective advancement. The neuroscientist returned to her desk, calling up personal files. Let me show you something that illustrates this principle on an individual level. My own research history. The display showed her publication record over the past 2 decades. Pre-war, I published perhaps 5 papers per year, each building incrementally on hegemony medical knowledge. Post-war, working within the Federation Research Network, I'm contributing to 50 papers per year, with each paper representing breakthrough advances rather than incremental improvements. Kess studied the data with amazement. Your productivity increased tenfold? My productivity increased because my access to knowledge increased exponentially, Vorthak explained. Instead of working within the limited scope of hegemony medical research, I now have access to biological data from every known species, medical techniques from across the galaxy, and collaborative partners who bring completely different perspectives to every problem. The doctor pulled up a specific research project. This study on regenerative medicine combines human enhancement technology, Thrakari exoskeleton repair mechanisms, Altarian crystalline structure analysis, and cetacean sonar-based diagnosis techniques. No single species could have conceived of this approach, but together we've developed treatments that seem almost miraculous. Such as? Complete limb regeneration in species that don't naturally possess that ability, Vorthak replied. Neural pathway reconstruction after traumatic brain injury. Organ replacement using cultured tissues that are genetically identical to the patient. Life extension techniques that work across multiple biological systems. The neuroscientist's expression grew thoughtful. But perhaps the most remarkable advancement is in psychological medicine. Understanding how different species process trauma, stress, and adaptation has allowed us to develop therapeutic techniques that seemed impossible just decades ago. Kess found herself thinking about Commander Zektar and his obvious psychological scars. Could these techniques help war veterans deal with their experiences? They're already helping, Vorthak confirmed. We've developed treatment protocols that allow veterans to process traumatic memories without losing the lessons learned from those experiences. Instead of simply suppressing trauma, we help patients integrate it into a more complete understanding of their capabilities and limitations. The doctor called up case studies on the display. Commander Zektar, whom you interviewed previously, has been participating in our veteran rehabilitation program. His experiences, traumatic as they were, provide valuable insights into interspecies conflict resolution and military psychology. He seemed deeply affected by what he'd witnessed. Trauma is a natural response to experiences that exceed our normal processing capacity, Vorthak explained. But humans have taught us that trauma can also be a catalyst for growth and adaptation. The goal isn't to eliminate the memory of difficult experiences, but to transform them into wisdom. The neuroscientist pulled up Zektar's treatment records. The commander's insights into human tactical psychology have helped us develop training programs for Federation security forces. His experiences provide context for understanding how different species perceive and respond to human military capabilities. You're turning his trauma into useful intelligence? We're helping him transform his trauma into valuable expertise, Vorthak corrected. The difference is crucial. Instead of being a victim of his experiences, he's becoming a teacher and advisor. His suffering becomes meaningful when it helps prevent future conflicts. The doctor's cybernetic implants flickered with emotion. This is perhaps the most profound way humans have changed galactic civilization. They've shown us that suffering and setbacks don't have to be permanent conditions. Every negative experience can become a foundation for positive growth. Kess was beginning to understand the deeper implications of humanity's influence. They've changed how other species think about adversity itself. Exactly, Vorthak confirmed. Before human contact, most species viewed hardship as something to be endured or avoided. Humans demonstrated that hardship could be embraced as an opportunity for improvement. The neuroscientist moved back to the window, gazing out at the bustling station. That psychological shift has transformed everything. Species that once accepted technological limitations now push beyond them. Civilizations that once feared change now actively seek it. Problems that once seemed unsolvable now become challenges to be conquered. But surely there must be some negative consequences to such rapid change. Vorthak considered the question carefully. Change is always disruptive, and rapid change can be traumatic. Some individuals, some cultures, struggle to adapt to the new paradigms. We've seen increases in anxiety disorders among species that prefer stability and predictability. The doctor called up medical statistics. But even these negative effects have prompted positive developments. Studying adaptation stress has led to better understanding of psychological resilience across species. We've developed support systems that help individuals and cultures navigate change more effectively. More problems becoming opportunities for advancement? The human approach to problem solving is remarkably consistent, Vorthak agreed. Every challenge becomes a research opportunity. Every setback becomes a chance to develop better techniques. Every failure becomes education for future success. The neuroscientist returned to her desk, pulling up a final set of files. Would you like to see the most remarkable example of this philosophy in action? The display showed detailed plans for something called the Galactic Rehabilitation Project. After the war, humans could have simply imposed their systems on conquered territories. Instead, they're investing enormous resources in helping former enemy worlds rebuild and improve themselves. Kess studied the project scope with amazement. They're improving the worlds they conquered. They're improving them beyond their pre-war capabilities, Vorthak confirmed. Former hegemony worlds are receiving infrastructure upgrades, educational exchanges, technological transfers, and economic investments that surpass anything they had under their original government. The doctor highlighted specific examples. Hegemony Prime, once a polluted industrial world with massive social inequality, is being terraformed into a garden world with sustainable industry and universal access to advanced education. Thrakari colony worlds are receiving defensive upgrades that make them more secure than they ever were under Imperial protection. Why would they invest so much in former enemies? Because humans understand that former enemies make the best allies, Vorthak explained. Someone who has seen your capabilities firsthand and chosen to join you is far more reliable than someone who has never been tested. The neuroscientist's expression grew philosophical. But beyond strategic considerations, humans seem genuinely committed to the idea that everyone deserves the opportunity to reach their full potential. They see unused capacity as waste, unhelped suffering as moral failure. They take responsibility for the welfare of entire civilizations. They take responsibility for creating systems that allow civilizations to take care of themselves, Vorthak clarified. Rather than creating dependency, they build capability. Rather than maintaining control, they teach self-governance. The doctor gestured to the station around them. Arcturus Station itself is an example. Humans designed and built it, but it's administered by a council representing all Federation species. They created the framework, but we determine how it's used. Kess found herself struggling with the implications of everything she'd learned. Dr. Vorthak, given everything you've seen, everything you've experienced, do you think humanity's influence on the galaxy has been positive? The neuroscientist was quiet for several minutes, her cybernetic implants flickering as she processed the question. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of experience. That's the wrong question, she said finally. Positive or negative implies a choice, an alternative path that might have been better. The reality is that humanity's influence on the galaxy was inevitable from the moment they achieved spaceflight. Vorthak pulled up a galactic map showing current Federation territory and influence. Look at the scope of human civilization. Thousands of worlds, hundreds of species, countless individuals all working together toward common goals. This isn't the result of conquest or coercion. It's the result of human nature being unleashed on a galactic scale. Human nature? Their refusal to accept limitations as permanent, the doctor explained. Their insistence that every problem has a solution, that every setback is temporary, that every individual and species has unrealized potential. These aren't political positions or strategic choices. They're fundamental aspects of human psychology. The neuroscientist's expression grew thoughtful. The question isn't whether humanity's influence has been positive, but whether the galaxy is ready for the changes they've brought. Some species, some individuals, struggle with the pace of advancement, the constant pressure to improve and adapt. And those who can't keep up are helped until they can, Vorthak replied firmly. That's perhaps the most remarkable thing about human civilization. They don't abandon those who struggle. They develop better ways to help them succeed. The doctor called up education statistics from across Federation space. Literacy rates, technical education, advanced research participation, all of these have increased dramatically even among species that initially resisted human influence. Through force? Through opportunity, Vorthak corrected. Humans have this remarkable ability to make advancement seem not just possible, but inevitable. They create systems where improvement becomes easier than stagnation. The neuroscientist moved to her office door, signaling that the interview was drawing to a close. Kess Velandra, you've been gathering stories from veterans of the war. But I think you're missing the larger story. Which is? The war never ended, Vorthak explained. It just changed from a military conflict to a cultural transformation. Humans are still conquering the galaxy, one mind at a time, one innovation at a time, one improved life at a time. As Kess prepared to leave, the doctor offered one final observation. When you publish your story, Remember that you're not just documenting the past. You're participating in humanity's ongoing campaign to prove that the future can always be better than the present. Walking through the corridors of Arcturus Station, surrounded by the casual collaboration of species that had once been bitter enemies, Kess realized that Dr. Vorthak was right. The transformation of galactic civilization wasn't a historical event to be analyzed and documented. It was an ongoing process that she was both witnessing and participating in. The veterans' tales had revealed not just the story of humanity's military conquest, but the deeper narrative of their cultural revolution. They hadn't just defeated their enemies, they had convinced them that defeat was the beginning of something better. As her transport prepared for departure, Kess found herself looking forward to her next interview with anticipation rather than journalistic duty. She was no longer just gathering stories about humanity's impact on the galaxy. She was documenting her own transformation from observer to participant in the most remarkable civilization the galaxy had ever seen. The journey to the Outer Rim took Kess through the heart of what was once the most contested region of the galaxy. Here, among the scattered worlds and asteroid mining stations, she would find her final interview subject. Captain Jorvac Ironshell of the Crystalline Confederation had been a legend during the war, a tactical genius whose mobile fleet had harassed human supply lines for nearly 2 years before his eventual capture. Unlike the previous veterans she had interviewed, Jorvac had requested to meet at a very specific location, the Memorial Garden on Titan 7th, a world that had been completely destroyed during the conflict and subsequently rebuilt by human terraforming teams. The symbolism wasn't lost on Kess as her transport descended through an atmosphere that shouldn't have existed, toward a world that had been reduced to molten slag and reformed into a garden paradise. The Memorial Garden itself was a masterpiece of landscape engineering, with carefully cultivated groves representing different biomes from worlds across the galaxy. Crystalline formations that sang in harmonic resonance when touched by wind, Thrakari desert flowers that bloomed only under specific light spectrums, cetacean coral analogues that filtered atmospheric toxins while providing habitat for countless species of fauna. At the center of the garden stood a simple monument, a black obelisk inscribed with the names of every sentient being who had died during the war. The list was staggering in its scope, covering all sides of the conflict, making no distinction between human and alien, victor and vanquished. Captain Jorvac stood before the monument, his crystalline exoskeleton reflecting the garden's varied lighting in prismatic patterns. Age had dimmed his natural luminescence, but his bearing remained unmistakably military despite the decades that had passed since the war's end. "Kess Velandra," he said without turning around, his voice carrying the melodic undertones characteristic of his species. "I've been expecting you." The captain's appearance was startling up close. His exoskeleton bore obvious signs of extensive reconstruction, crystalline grafts and metallic reinforcements that spoke of grievous injuries sustained and carefully repaired. But more striking than the physical modifications were the subtle changes to his natural coloration, patterns that suggested exposure to energies that no crystalline should have survived. "Captain Jorvac, thank you for agreeing to speak with me," Kess began, activating her recording device. "I understand you have a unique perspective on humanity's role in the war." "Unique, yes," Jorvac replied, finally turning to face her. His optical clusters, naturally evolved for perceiving electromagnetic radiation across multiple spectra, focused on her with unsettling intensity. "I was among the last to surrender, and the first to understand what surrender really meant." The captain gestured for them to walk along one of the garden's meandering paths, past memorial groves dedicated to specific battles and lost worlds. "Tell me, journalist, what have the other veterans told you about humans?" Kess considered her response carefully. "They've described humanity as adaptable, innovative, Psychologically resilient, they've spoken about human mercy, their capacity for transformation, their ability to turn enemies into allies. All true, Jorvac agreed, but incomplete. They've told you about human capabilities, but have they explained human purpose? The question caught Kess off guard. Purpose? Why humans do what they do, the captain clarified. What drives them to constant expansion, endless improvement, relentless optimization of everything they encounter? Have your other subjects explained the core motivation that makes humans what they are? They paused beside a grove of Terran oak trees, their Earth origin genetics modified to thrive in alien soil. The symbolism was obvious and undoubtedly intentional. I spent 2 years fighting human forces, Jorvac continued. 2 years analyzing their tactics, studying their psychology, trying to understand the logic behind their actions. I thought I was facing a typical expansionist empire, driven by resource acquisition and territorial control. The captain's optical clusters dimmed slightly, a sign of deep contemplation among his species. I was wrong. Humans aren't driven by want or need or fear. They're driven by something far more dangerous and far more powerful. Which is? Hope, Jorvac replied simply. Not hope for themselves, but hope for everything they encounter. Humans look at the universe and see not what it is, but what it could become. They continued walking, passing through a section dedicated to the war's technological innovations. Display cases showed examples of weapons, defenses, and support equipment developed by all sides during the conflict, now repurposed for peaceful applications. During my final campaign, I had humans cornered in the Veil Nebula, Jorvac explained. 3 of their ships, damaged and running low on supplies, trapped in a region of space where their sensors couldn't function properly. I had 50 vessels, full combat readiness, complete tactical superiority. The captain paused beside a display showing nebular navigation equipment. Standard military doctrine suggested a direct assault. Overwhelming force applied quickly to minimize casualties and end the engagement cleanly, but I had learned to be cautious when dealing with humans. What did you do? I offered them terms, Jorvac replied. Generous terms. Safe passage to neutral space in exchange for surrender of their vessels and any intelligence data they carried. It was more mercy than any other species would have shown in similar circumstances. The captain's crystalline features shifted through several colors, indicating complex emotional states. The human commander's response changed everything I thought I understood about their species. They had reached a section of the garden dedicated to scientific achievements, where holographic displays demonstrated breakthrough technologies developed through interspecies cooperation. The irony of discussing warfare surrounded by peaceful applications wasn't lost on either of them. She thanked me for the offer, Jorvac continued. Thanked me sincerely, without sarcasm or mockery. Then she asked if I would be willing to hear a counterproposal. Kess found herself leaning forward despite herself. A counter-proposal? They were outnumbered 17-1. Exactly, the captain confirmed. 3 damaged ships proposing terms to a fleet that could vaporize them without effort. The audacity was so unprecedented that I agreed to listen. Jorvac's optical clusters brightened as he recalled the memory. The human commander, Admiral Sarah Chen, proceeded to explain how my fleet and her ships could work together to solve what she called the real problem. Which was? The Veil Nebula itself, Jorvac replied. Chen had been studying the region's unique properties, the way it interfered with sensors and communication systems. But instead of seeing it as an obstacle to overcome, she saw it as a resource to be utilized. The captain gestured to a nearby holographic display showing nebular phenomenon. She proposed that our combined forces could establish a permanent research station in the nebula's heart, using its unique properties to develop new forms of faster-than-light communication and advanced sensor technology. Kess felt her crystalline structure vibrate with astonishment. In the middle of a military engagement, she proposed a joint scientific venture? Not just proposed it, but made it sound inevitable, Jorvac confirmed. Chen laid out detailed plans for resource sharing, technological exchange, even personnel rotation schedules. She spoke as if the war was merely an inconvenient interruption to more important work. The captain's coloration shifted to patterns Kess recognized as wonder mixed with bewilderment. What made the proposal even more remarkable was that it wasn't a desperate attempt to avoid defeat. Chen genuinely believed that both our forces would benefit more from cooperation than from conflict. Did you accept? I should have destroyed her fleet immediately, Jorvac replied. Every principle of military command demanded that I end the engagement before her psychological warfare could compromise my crew's morale. Instead, I found myself asking for technical specifications. The captain paused beside a memorial dedicated to scientists killed during the war, their names inscribed on crystalline tablets that sang softly in the wind. Chen's proposal wasn't just tactically sound, it was scientifically brilliant. The research applications she described could have advanced crystalline technology by centuries. So you agreed to her terms? I agreed to a temporary ceasefire while my technical officers reviewed her data, Jorvac corrected. Standard procedure for evaluating potential intelligence assets. What I didn't anticipate was how thoroughly my crews would be convinced by human logic. The captain's optical clusters dimmed with what seemed like embarrassment. Within 6 hours, my chief science officer was requesting permission to begin preliminary experiments. My communications specialist wanted to establish permanent liaison protocols with the human ships. Even my weapons officer was discussing modifications to our defensive systems based on Chen's technical suggestions. They had reached the garden's highest point, where an observation platform offered views of the entire memorial complex. The scope was breathtaking. Thousands of acres dedicated to remembering a war while celebrating the peace that had followed. That's when I realized the true nature of human psychological warfare, Jorvac continued. They don't break enemy morale through fear or intimidation. They break it by offering something better than victory. Better than victory? Purpose, the captain explained. Chen didn't just propose that we stop fighting, she proposed that we start building something magnificent together. She offered my crews the chance to participate in scientific discoveries that would benefit the entire galaxy. Jorvac gestured toward the memorial gardens below them. Look at this place. When Titan VII was destroyed, most species would have written it off as a casualty of war, a dead world to be abandoned and forgotten. Humans looked at molten slag and saw potential. The captain's coloration shifted to deep blues and greens, patterns that indicated profound respect. The terraforming project that rebuilt this world involved engineers and scientists from 47 different species, former enemies working side by side to literally recreate life from destruction. Including crystalline engineers? Including me, Jorvac confirmed. After my surrender, I was offered a choice: imprisonment as a prisoner of war, or participation in the Titan VII reconstruction project. The choice was obvious. The captain moved to the platform's edge, looking out over the gardens with unmistakable pride. I spent 5 years here, working with human terraforming specialists to develop crystalline atmospheric processors, technologies that could only have been created through interspecies cooperation. Kess followed his gaze, taking in the impossible beauty of a world reborn. What changed your mind about humans? Working alongside them, Jorvac replied immediately. You can study human tactics, analyze their technology, even interrogate their prisoners, but you can't understand humans until you've seen them work. The captain's optical clusters began cycling through rapid color changes, indicating intense emotion. Humans approach problems differently than any other species I've encountered. Where we see obstacles, they see challenges. Where we see limitations, they see temporary inconveniences. Where we see failure, They see education. They walked to the platform center, where a holographic display showed the reconstruction of Titan VII in time-lapse format. The transformation from dead rock to living world played out in minutes, revealing the staggering scope of the achievement. This world was completely sterilized, Jorvac explained. Atmospheric incineration, surface vitrification, even the planet's magnetic field was disrupted by the weapons used during the final battle. Conventional wisdom said it would take millennia for natural processes to restore habitability. The display showed the early stages of reconstruction, massive industrial ships deploying atmospheric processors and magnetic field generators. Humans rebuilt this world's entire biosphere in 7 years, not just made it habitable, but made it more beautiful and more ecologically stable than it had been originally. How is that possible? Cooperation, Jorvac replied simply. They combined human atmospheric engineering with Thrakari geological expertise, cetacean ecological design, and crystalline energy systems. Each species contributed their strengths to overcome challenges that would have been impossible for any one species to solve. The captain manipulated the display to show specific construction phases, but the technical achievement was less impressive than the social engineering. Getting 47 different species to work together on such a massive project required diplomatic skills that bordered on the miraculous. Diplomatic skills? Humans have this remarkable ability to help other species see their own potential, Jorvac explained. They don't demand cooperation. They demonstrate how cooperation benefits everyone involved. The display shifted to show current status of the memorial world, bustling with activity as visitors from across the galaxy came to pay their respects and study the reconstruction techniques. Titan VII has become a pilgrimage site, the captain continued. Not just for war veterans, but for anyone who wants to understand what's possible when species work together toward common goals. The holographic display zoomed in on various sections of the planet, showing research facilities, educational centers, and cultural exchange programs. The world now hosts the largest interspecies university in the galaxy, research stations studying everything from quantum physics to xenobiology, and cultural centers where different species share their knowledge and traditions. Jorvac's optical clusters brightened with obvious satisfaction. My atmospheric processors are still functioning, providing clean air for millions of inhabitants from dozens of different worlds. Technology I developed fighting humans is now helping sustain the most diverse community in galactic history. They descended from the observation platform, following a path that led through the garden's newest section, dedicated to ongoing Federation achievements. Here, holographic displays showed real-time updates on scientific breakthroughs, technological innovations, and cultural exchanges happening across Federation space. This is what humans do, the captain explained as they walked. They don't just solve immediate problems. They create systems that continue solving problems long after they've moved on to new challenges. Kess paused beside a display showing current terraforming projects across the galaxy. The scope was staggering, dozens of worlds being transformed simultaneously using techniques developed here on Titan VII. Captain Jorvac, when you look at everything humanity has accomplished, everything they've changed about galactic civilization, do you have any regrets about your surrender? The captain was quiet for several minutes, his crystalline form shifting through subtle color patterns as he considered the question. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of reflection. Regret is the wrong word, he said finally. Regret implies that I had a meaningful choice, that resistance could have led to a different outcome. What humans taught me is that their victory was inevitable from the moment they achieved spaceflight. Inevitable how? Because they represent evolution itself, Jorvac explained. Not biological evolution, but conceptual evolution. They embody the principle that everything can be improved, that every limitation can be overcome, that every setback is temporary. The captain gestured to the memorial gardens around them. Look at what they did with defeat itself. Instead of humiliating their enemies or erasing the memory of the war, they created this place to honor everyone who died, regardless of which side they fought for. They had reached a section of the garden dedicated to individual stories, holographic displays showing personal accounts from veterans, civilians, and survivors from all sides of the conflict. Kess was surprised to see her own recording equipment listed as a contributing source. Your interviews will be added to this collection, Yorvak noted, following her gaze. Another piece of the historical record, another perspective on humanity's transformation of the galaxy. Does it concern you that your words will become part of human historical narrative? It reassures me, the captain replied unexpectedly. Humans don't suppress inconvenient truths or rewrite history to make themselves look better. They document everything, including their own mistakes and failures, because they use history as a tool for improvement rather than a source of pride. Yorvak activated one of the holographic displays, showing archived footage from his own surrender ceremony decades earlier. Kess watched as a younger, less modified version of the captain formally handed over his command codes to Admiral Chen, the same human who had proposed their joint research venture. I was expecting humiliation, Yorvak admitted, watching his younger self with obvious emotion. Public degradation, symbolic destruction of my ship, the kind of theatrical domination that other species use to demonstrate their superiority. The footage showed instead a simple, dignified ceremony where Chen accepted the surrender with obvious respect for Yorvak's service and sacrifice. Instead, she thanked me for my service to my people and offered me a position helping to design the research station we had discussed in the nebula. The same research station she had proposed during the battle? Not just proposed, but already begun planning in detail, Yorvak confirmed. While we were negotiating my surrender, her engineering teams were developing the technical specifications we had discussed. They took our conversation seriously enough to begin implementation before they even knew if I would cooperate. The captain's coloration shifted to patterns Kess was beginning to recognize as wonder mixed with admiration. That's when I realized that humans don't just defeat their enemies, they recruit them. Every conflict becomes an opportunity to identify talent and potential allies. The holographic display shifted to show the completed research station, a marvel of engineering that combined technologies from multiple species into something greater than the sum of its parts. The station has produced breakthrough discoveries in faster-than-light communication, quantum sensing, and dimensional physics. Technologies that have benefited every member species of the Federation. And you helped design it? I helped design the original atmospheric processors, Yorvak clarified. But the station has been continuously improved and expanded by successive generations of researchers. My contributions were just the foundation for work that continues to this day. They moved to the garden's final section, a grove of trees from the captain's own homeworld, their crystalline bark singing softly in harmonic resonance with his natural frequencies. The sound was hauntingly beautiful, a connection to a culture that had been transformed but not destroyed by human influence. This is perhaps the most remarkable thing about human conquest, Yorvak said, settling beside the singing trees. They don't erase other cultures, they preserve and enhance them. These trees wouldn't have survived on my homeworld after industrial development, but humans helped us create protected groves across dozens of worlds. They preserved your culture while changing it. They helped us preserve the best parts while discarding the limitations, the captain corrected. Crystalline society was beautiful but rigid, artistic but stagnant. Human influence introduced flexibility without destroying our essential identity. Yorvak's optical clusters dimmed as he accessed deep memories. Before the war, crystalline civilization had remained essentially unchanged for thousands of years. We were proud of our stability, our resistance to outside influence, our careful preservation of traditional ways. And now? Now we're explorers, inventors, teachers, the captain replied with obvious pride. Young crystallines study at human universities, work on terraforming projects, contribute to scientific research that spans the galaxy. We've become more than we ever thought possible while remaining unmistakably ourselves. The singing trees shifted their harmonic frequencies as the wind changed, creating new melodies that seemed to respond to the conversation. Kes found herself moved by the beauty of the sound, understanding for the first time how music could transcend species barriers. Captain, what do you think the galaxy will look like in another generation? Yorvak considered the question carefully, his crystalline features cycling through complex color patterns. Better, he said simply. Different in ways we can't predict, but certainly better. How can you be so confident? Because humans won't allow it to be otherwise, the captain explained. They have this fundamental inability to accept that things are good enough. Every achievement becomes a foundation for greater achievements. Every success becomes a platform for helping others succeed. The captain gestured to the memorial garden around them. Look at what they did with a war memorial. Instead of creating a monument to victory, they created a center for learning, healing, and cooperation. They turned remembrance into inspiration. But surely there must be limits to what even humans can accomplish. Yorvak's optical clusters brightened with what seemed like amusement. That's exactly what we said about terraforming dead worlds, about integrating dozens of different species into a single civilization, about turning enemies into allies. The captain stood and began walking toward the garden's exit, his movements creating soft musical chimes from his crystalline joints. The only limit on human achievement is human imagination, and their imagination seems to be literally unlimited. As they walked, Kes noticed that other visitors to the memorial were watching their conversation with obvious interest. Veterans from multiple species, researchers, students, families with children learning about the history that had shaped their current reality. Captain, one final question, Kes said as they approached the transport platform. If you could send a message to any species that might be considering resistance to human expansion, what would you tell them? Yorvak paused at the platform's edge, looking back over the memorial garden one last time. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute conviction. Don't resist, he said simply. Not because resistance is futile, but because cooperation is so much better than anything you can imagine. The captain's coloration shifted to the deep gold patterns that indicated solemn oath-giving among his species. Humans don't want to conquer you. They want to help you become everything you're capable of being. The question isn't whether you can resist them, but whether you're brave enough to accept their help. As Yorvak's transport departed, leaving Kes alone on the platform, she found herself processing not just his words but the entire experience of the memorial garden. The singing trees, the holographic displays, the casual interaction between species that had once been mortal enemies, all of it spoke to a transformation so profound that it was difficult to comprehend. She realized that her story had evolved far beyond documenting veteran experiences. She was chronicling the greatest transformation in galactic history, the rise of a civilization that conquered not through force, but through inspiration, that ruled not through fear, but through hope. The transport back to the core worlds gave Kes time to review her recordings and prepare her final report. But as she worked, she found herself thinking less about the past and more about the future. What would happen when human expansion encountered species beyond the current galactic borders? How would they handle contact with civilizations that might be their technological equals or superiors? The answer, she realized, lay in everything the veterans had told her. Humans wouldn't see such encounters as threats to be neutralized, but as opportunities for mutual advancement. They would approach superior civilizations not as conquerors, but as students, eager to learn and share knowledge. As her transport approached Earth's solar system, Kes felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. She was about to deliver a story that would reshape how many species understood their own history and their place in the current galactic order. The veteran testimonies she had gathered weren't just accounts of past events, they were predictions of future possibilities. The final irony wasn't lost on her. In documenting humanity's impact on the galaxy, she had herself been transformed. She was no longer an outside observer reporting on human civilization. She was a participant in its ongoing evolution, a voice in the great conversation about what the galaxy could become. Her story would join the Memorial Gardens archives, one more piece of the historical record that humans collected not as trophies of victory, but as tools for continued improvement. The veterans she had interviewed would read her work, comment on it, perhaps suggest improvements or corrections that would make it more useful for future generations. Even her act of journalism had become part of the human system of collaborative advancement, where every contribution was valued and every perspective helped build a more complete understanding of reality. As Earth grew larger in her transport's viewport, Kes realized that Commander Zektar, Dr. Vorthak, and Captain Yorvak had given her something more valuable than just their stories. They had shown her what it meant to be part of something larger than herself, something that grew stronger with every individual that joined it. The galaxy belonged to humanity now, not because they had conquered it, but because they had convinced everyone else that belonging to humanity meant becoming the best possible version of yourself. It was, she reflected, perhaps the most terrifying and wonderful form of conquest ever conceived. Her story would tell the universe that resistance to human expansion wasn't just futile, it was unnecessary, because humanity's greatest victory wasn't over their enemies, but for them. They had proven that conquest and liberation could be the same act, that defeat and victory could lead to identical outcomes, that war and peace were just different paths to the same destination. The galaxy was no longer a collection of competing species struggling for resources and territory. It had become a unified civilization dedicated to the proposition that everything could always be better, that every limitation was temporary, that every setback was just another opportunity for advancement. And at the center of it all were the humans. The impossible species that had looked at an uncaring universe and decided it needed improvement, then made that improvement happen through sheer determination and limitless optimism. The veterans' tales she carried weren't just history. They were prophecy, a glimpse of what would happen when human civilization encountered whatever challenges the universe could present. They would study those challenges, adapt to them, overcome them, and somehow make them part of an ever-expanding definition of what was possible. The galaxy had learned to hope, and hope, as the veterans had taught her, was the most powerful weapon humans possessed.